Okay, so Matt, I know that you are a private investigator. You took great interest in this case. Walk me through sort of the nuts and bolts of this, how you got involved. I know you were really prominent in a case in Texas that kind of came full circle. We can touch on that in a minute, but why did you want to get involved in one of Raleigh's oldest cold cases?
Well, originally I'm from Virginia and I spent time in California doing TV production and then got into the podcasting. And like you said, I started with a podcast out of Texas. I was kind of moving around from state to state for a while and then ended up coming back to North Carolina, which is kind of like my homeland. And when I got here, one of the experts that I had interviewed on for the previous case out of Texas, he was in Wake Forest, and so I met with him because that case and podcast was kind of stalling out. I said, I'm looking for another case. The issue with that Texas case was at that point I was in North Carolina. That case was in Texas, so I said, I need a North Carolina case. I want to be able to like knock on doors and talk to people. So I met with him. His name is Marty Ludus. He's a fingerprint examiner for Raleigh PD, and he worked there back in the day and with the SBI. And met with him. He didn't have one that evening that we met, and then the next morning he texted me Beth-Ellen Vinson. I looked her up, and it was just like, wow, like this is the case I was looking for. It's a unsolved murder from 1994. I always like to do things and launch things when it seems when the time feels right. And then when I was digging into that case, it was like the 30-year anniversary. So, I was hoping that I would get a little more media attention with that. But yeah, I mean, the case on the surface, it seems somewhat simple, but then once I kept like digging into the case, just was what was already publicly known, I just became more and more fascinated with it, especially with that anonymous letter.
So let's talk about Beth-Ellen Vinson. She was born and raised in Goldsboro, North Carolina. She was a dancer. She was aspiring to get to New York City to make it on Broadway. She finds herself in Raleigh. Walk me through sort of her arrangements and kind of the case itself, the nuts and bolts of the case, kind of what happened once she got here, who she was living with, and then obviously she was an escort looking to make a little bit more money. And that obviously would play into the fact of when she went missing.
Sure. So yeah, Beth Ellen Vinson, in 1994, she was 17 years old. She was just finishing up her junior year of high school. And basically, it's interesting because Beth Ellen was a beauty queen. She was into dancing. She was just very prominent in her high school. And, it was kind of like a high school celebrity kind of thing. But around that junior year, she kind of changed and just kind of started rebelling. And she was kind of, she loved dancing, but she was sick of the beauty pageant kind of cookie cutter stuff. And she didn't want to be seen that way, I think. And so she kind of was like, okay, I'm going to cut my hair. I'm going to dye it black. And I'm just gonna kind of be a grunge chick, back in the day, and she was just like really rebelling about against her parents, and so I don't know what the whole deal was with her parents, but she just kept wanting to run away. I think she just wanted to grow up really fast. And so at that point, she was like, I don't even want to live in my parents' house anymore. I just want to, be out on my own. Obviously, she did want to go to New York to get into the dancing. Her mom had taken her to New York a couple times. She had seen the big city, so she just wanted to be in the big city. And so that summer after her junior year, she, she was kind of like bouncing around from her friends' houses. She didn't want to listen to her parents, didn't want to stay in their house. And then she meets her best friend's, it's kind of an interesting family tree, but basically her best friend's step uncle. So her best friend's father married uh the sister, the older sister of the guy she would come to live with in Raleigh, and they were all NC State students. So I think that she saw these three guys. They were probably like 3 or 4 years older than her, as kind of like older brothers at first. And then so she moves in from Goldsboro to Raleigh, which is, about a little over an hour up the road. So it's still, a stone's throw away from home. I don't think she wasn't like, getting too far. And she felt like she was moving in with guys that, were very close to her family circle and her best friend circle. So she moves in with these guys, and this is about the weekend of July 4th-ish of 1994. Within 40 days, she's found stabbed to death. And so she's living with these three guys. She starts dating one of them. His name was Ricky. Ricky was living in apartments at NC State with his older brother, Brian, who was like 2 years older, and then one of their other friends from the Goldsboro, Mount Olive area, Walt. So she's living with those three guys. I think Ricky and Brian at that time, they were working at Rockola, like a little restaurant bar near the campus. And Beth-Ellen being 17, she couldn't really work in, I guess, bars per se. And so for some reason, which is still kind of a mystery, she started escorting. And then back in 94, what escorting and how you would get into that was, before the internet, was supposedly, she just found this escort service in the yellow pages, in the back of the yellow pages, called them up. Of course, you're supposed to be 18 when you get involved with that stuff. They didn't ask for her ID, or she faked one. And then so she starts escorting. And I do think that, the ad in the yellow pages, it said, private dances and stuff. So she was kind of like thinking, oh, I could dance for, I'm dancing, and it was basically a stepping stone to get to New York. She wanted to raise as much money as quick as she can. And I think Raleigh definitely was like her, stepping stone to the big city. And so, but over the course of those 40 days, she starts dating Ricky. And according to the papers and from what most of the officers have told me, she really only went on like 5 or 6 of these escort calls. And then so, over that 40-day period, she's just kind of hanging out, doing the college scene. I've talked to a lot of people that said that, she wasn't drinking that much. I mean, she might have had a beer or something, but, she wasn't partying. She was just kind of hanging out. I think she just thought that, like, this is super cool. I'm at college, but I'm 17. And she starts doing the escort deal. And then one night, it was actually a Monday night going into Tuesday. Tuesday would have been August 16th, 1994. She gets a call from the escort service at roughly about 2 a.m. I believe was like the first call. They might have actually tried to line it up a little bit before. And so she gets a call at around 2 a.m. She's getting ready to go out on one of these escort calls. The escort call is to a motel. The innkeepers is kind of a seedy motel in the Raleigh area. It's still the establishment's still there today. It's called, I think, America's Best Inn or something. And it's you look at it and it's one of those seedy establishments. So she is getting ready to go out on this escort call. Well, at that time, which is interesting, Brian, Ricky's older brother, and Walt, they decide to go to Walmart, which is up by Crabtree Mall. They leave for Walmart shortly before Beth Ellen leaves. She's still getting ready. I've talked to people that have said that, there was an argument that night between Ricky and Beth Ellen. Of course, Ricky being her, boyfriend, even though they hadn't been together long, he didn't like her doing this type of work, I mean, no man would. So, Brian and Walt are off going to Walmart. Beth Ellen leaves the apartment in a little, sexy little dress to go do this little escort call. And she leaves in her vehicle at approximately 2:35 to maybe somewhere between 2:55. The time hadn't really been nailed down. She leaves. The official story is Walt and Brian, they come back from Walmart approximately 30 minutes after she left. And when they get back, they say Ricky's on the couch. Ricky says she left about 30 minutes ago. They all hang out until about 4 in the morning, so that would mean she was gone a little over an hour. They all go to sleep, is the official story, and then around 7 a.m., Ricky wakes up. He starts calling people because she's not back. She hasn't come back from this escort call, and Ricky's calling the escort service, which apparently was closed at that time because it was early in the morning. He starts calling her friends, and then Ricky starts goes to look for her because Ricky would have known where she was going. He knew the location of that motel, and he probably would have had to tell her, or somebody would have had to tell her how to get there because she didn't know Raleigh. So Ricky goes to look for her, and this is where again it gets interesting because there's different stories of how Ricky wound up at her car, but Ricky says he was going to look for to the motel, which was north on Capitol Boulevard. Her car was south on Capitol Boulevard, but approximately 9 a.m. That August 16th, that Tuesday morning. So 9 a.m., that would be about 6 hours after she had left. Ricky pulls up and at her vehicle. Her vehicle was found, like it was seen at like 5 a.m. at this car lot, which was about 2 miles south of the motel. And the when the car is found, so basically the car is seen by people at the car lot about 5. At 7, when they're opening the car lot, that's when it's officially called in. And when the car was found, the door was open, the music was playing, there was a female shoe in the floorboard. So when the workers at that car lot saw that, they said, "Yeah, this doesn't look good at all." They called it in to Raleigh PD. Raleigh PD gets there a little bit before 9, and or maybe around 8, but so they're there processing the car, looking at the car. Ricky pulls up at 9, says, "Hey, my girlfriend's been missing. She left about 3 in the morning to go on this escort call." And then, that's how the kind of the case unfolds. So the police basically at that point kind of had two suspects, but they really focused on one. They focused on the client at the motel, and they thought that she had made it there, and then maybe that guy had he had somehow moved her vehicle, or however her vehicle would have wound up 2 miles south. But they were digging into that guy who was just at this motel. I've talked to that guy's ex-wife. He's now deceased. His name is Randy, or his name was Randy. But he was like 35. He would go on these benders. And so when he went on these benders, he would call up all these escorts. And so how the Raleigh PD were able to rule out Randy as a suspect in this case was that he called multiple escorts, and that multiple escorts were coming in and out of the motel around that time where Beth-Ellen would have been there. And so they all kind of corroborated that they were at the motel with Randy, and Randy didn't have an opportunity to murder Beth-Ellen. So then they determined that, then they determined she never made it to the motel that night. And so then Ricky kind of becomes the focus of the investigation. Um, and the interesting part is I've talked to quite a few people in law enforcement with Raleigh PD, the detectives that worked on the case or worked on the cold case that came in later. And it's kind of a half of the cops that I talked to really think Ricky didn't do it, and half of the cops think Ricky really did do it. So, it is that's what makes the case really interesting, because of, it's like, well, if Ricky did it, it's basically like the case comes down to, were Walt and Brian, the two roommates, one of whom is his brother, the other is Ricky's best friend, were the two roommates lying to the police that Ricky was there at approximately 3:30 a.m. when they got back from Walmart? Because if they're telling the truth and Ricky was there at 3:30 a.m., he would not have had enough time to chase Beth Ellen up the Beltway, kill her, wash himself off, get back to their apartment, and be sitting on the couch, when they get there at 3:30.
Matt,
But
can you talk, though we missed this, her manner of death and where she was found?
oh, so her car is found on August 16th, 1994. And like I said, like the car was in disarray. It definitely looked like she was taken from the vehicle. There's a huge search. They searched, like they really focused on the half-mile radius around there, because that was telling them that would be the area she was found. They searched that area, couldn't come up with anything. 7 days later, after her vehicle was found, and it was basically like, it was less than a mile, but a little more than a half a mile. It was about three-quarters of a mile from where her vehicle was, in this kind of warehouse area, that was very close to her vehicle. The people that worked at the warehouse started smelling an odor, and they discovered that her body was laying in this kind of a little ravine, this little ditch in between the two warehouses, and her body was covered, kind of in the bottom of this ditch, with cardboard. And when they found the body, and then they start, having to process her body, they determined she was stabbed to death probably around 20 times. Um, and due to the nature of her body being out there for 7 days in August, when there was some rain, the heat, it just left the body in a difficult condition to process. But they were able to determine that, obviously she was stabbed to death.
Matt, what do you think makes this case so mysterious and the fact that it hasn't been solved yet?
Well, what makes it mysterious is there's a lot of people that think it's Ricky. But if you look, if you look at the nature of the crime, Ricky knew where she was going. Um, where her vehicle was found, like, their biggest mystery is, like, how did her vehicle wind up parked at that car lot? It looks like she was almost pulled over, with the positioning of the car. And so they went down, theories of, like, was it a blue light bandit? Was it a fake cop that pulled her over? So why did her car get pulled over? The theory is that if it wasn't Ricky, she basically was lost asking directions. So she pulled up to another vehicle, and then that other vehicle, whoever's in that other vehicle, snatched her. If it's the Ricky theory, then Ricky would have followed her up the belt line, been honking, hey, I want to talk to you, kind of thing, and he would have pulled behind her and snatched her. But the interesting thing about Ricky is, whoever killed Beth Ellen, they would have been covered with blood. So how would Ricky have gotten all that blood off his body, even if the guys were asleep? Like, the, it would mean that these guys, his roommates, one of his brothers and good friend, they would have been lying for 30 years. Ricky, obviously I've looked at his history. He has a family now. He does not have any kind of violent record. So, did this guy just snap and he was able to, get his life, just act like that didn't happen for 30 years? Fascinating. If that's what happened. But then you look at it from the other side, is like, well, whoever killed her, um, likely like the people have said, experts have said like the knife would have slipped through their hand. They should have had a cut on their hand. It was a fight out there in the woods. Likely there would have been a defensive wounds to the perpetrator. Apparently Ricky didn't have any defensive wounds. Ricky didn't have any kind of an impale himself with his own knife. Where did the like if Ricky did it, where did the blood go?
Right.
So it is one of those weird ones where, you look at the crime and it's like it's the heat of passion, it's a stabbing that seems very familiar. That seems like somebody that was very close to Beth Ellen. But then you look at the evidence. Where's the evidence? Where'd all the blood go? Apparently it wasn't in their car. What wasn't in Ricky's car? I mean, Ricky would have had to been driving his car, and they processed his car. What we don't know is, when they processed the car because they were looking at the client for maybe a week. So, did Ricky have enough time to, clean things up, in the time where before the cops really started honing in on him? Um, yeah, I mean, that's the mystery. And then the thing that really got me initially was the anonymous letter that was sent to Goldsborough's paper about 5 months well, actually, it was sent to Goldsborough's paper 2 months, but then it was later published 5 months later. But this anonymous letter had details about Beth Ellen being an escort, but then it went into this like elaborate story where Beth Ellen was into this BDSM, like high level politicians and high level people in Raleigh, like this kind of underground club, like a sex party kind of club, which did exist. There were newspaper articles about that club. So whoever was writing that is interesting because they did have details of Beth Ellen being an escort before that was made public. They did have details about this sex club, but according to police, and it doesn't seem like there's any direct evidence that proves that Beth Ellen was in this kind of elite sex kind of a club. She was just doing this, escorting thing out of the back of the Yellow Pages. It wasn't that type of a deal. So why would somebody make that up? But then whoever made that up did have, real details about the case and about Beth Ellen. So, I mean, it's a big piece.
And so you started a podcast about this and have been heavily involved in it. I mean, are you still getting leads? Is it truly cold? I mean, what's next for this case as it's been, 30 years?
Yeah, I am still getting leads, and yeah, I get, every couple weeks. I mean, it's hot and cold, but at least once a month, I'll get, a fresh lead of somebody who just found the podcast and like, oh my gosh, what's next is I really am trying to legally help the family push for more DNA testing. DNA testing is really the thing that's going to get this done. If somebody comes to me and say, I heard this back in 30 years ago, that's not going to be enough to build a case. So we need physical evidence, and that has been the real issue with this whole case. There isn't any physical evidence just because of the condition her body was in. There were no cell phones, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I mean, I'm still boots on the ground. I'm still in North Carolina. There are still people that I want to talk to, and there is more testing that can be done. So I
Yeah,
mean,
I
that's
mean,
where we're at.
DNA testing has come so far. Was the murder weapon ever found in this case, Matt?
No. Nope. Murder weapon was never found. And there's other kind of interesting leads, like somebody killed another teen in a very similar style around the Goldsboro area a couple years after. So I've been talking with them. There was actually partial DNA on that knife. So I'm working on trying to see if that partial DNA, that partial DNA that didn't go back to that suspect who's already incarcerated, could that DNA, that partial, be part of Beth Ellen? There's another guy that said that there's I think it's an Adler. He's a serial killer. He's locked up, And I was just talking to him this week. He said that he knows for a fact that Beth Ellen is on a possible victims list of his unknown victims. So, I mean, there's definitely, a lot of different potentials, but I just find it hard to believe. I mean, with a case like this, that it's not going to get solved one way or another, and I just want to do it before her dad dies.
Yeah, I know that's really important to you too, Matt. I mean, her mother is passed, correct? And her dad is still alive. I mean, I hate to use the word closure, but I know this would be so much for him to be able to figure out who brutally murdered his daughter.
Yeah. Yeah. I get emotional about that, just thinking about the family. Um, just what they've gone through. And yeah, uh, I, if they have hope, it's very little, you know. So that's tough. But, I just want to do everything I can.
Yeah, it's really awesome what you're doing, just out there, boots on the ground, trying to figure this out in a 3-decade-old cold case. So I really appreciate your time. And we'll make sure that we talk about your podcast too. Just, obviously, I always used to say as a reporter, no tip is too small, right? The tiniest
Oh, yeah.
little thing can blow this thing wide open. Something that you may think is super, super insignificant could be huge. So we're definitely going to put Matt's information in the show notes. So if you have any information on Beth Ellen, I know he'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Matt.
Okay. Bye-bye.